Welcome back to another week, another Sinister. I'm BOZE. I am your host. If you're like me and also obsessively interested in female killers, then Sinister is probably the show for you. That's exactly what we do. We talk about female killers and we talk about why it happened. I have gone through so many cases, and in my opinion, so many true crime cases are unprocessed trauma in the person's childhood that leads to a trigger that leads to a violent act later on. And so the whole reason that I like to dive into things on the show is because I want to know about their childhood. I want to know what happened. So if you've been here for a couple episodes, you know I spent about 30 minutes talking about the childhood and not the crime. But today is a little bit different. Today's case, you may have actually heard from me before. I did it previously years ago, but now I not only have a bit more information about the case, but I have a smoking gun, perhaps. I have this piece of information that I never knew about Cai Liao, and it finally explains to me why she committed one of the most terrifying crimes I think I have ever talked about. This case has been burned in my brain for decades, and if you've heard it before or you heard me tell it before on the channel, you're gonna remember this one. Cai Liao grew up extremely poor. For many generations, her family was basically in the same area, working the same kind of jobs, if any jobs at all, just trying to make it. What's interesting about this is we don't have too much information on Cai's childhood, which is so different than the regular Sinisters. But one thing I have to point out is she later went on to become a fairly successful businesswoman. This is so impressive because nobody in Cai's family had ever made it out. So there was no aspirational person that was close to her. There was no one that could teach her the ropes. There was no one that could give her the resources, but she was smart and she was creative and she was able to figure out how to get herself out of poverty. Breaking the generational curse of poverty is honestly very impressive. I just want to highlight a bit of Cai's early life and just also point out she was intelligent. She figured things out. And the only reason I really want to highlight her being intelligent is because later, Cai would act like she didn't understand right from wrong. She would almost infantilize herself. Cai is not a lost, immature, confused woman. She's actually quite smart. So in her 20s, finance and security is extremely important to her, and something else, family. She starts to form a family of her own. She gets married, she has a daughter, she's working her job, her husband is pretty well off, but then suddenly he dies abruptly in a car accident. People said that after he died, Cai could not get herself back together. I also think this is interesting because this is the point that people said she was experiencing some severe mental health issues. And, when we were digging into this case, a bunch of people pointed out in China, they don't normally give a lot of credence to mental health. Listen, we're all suffering, okay? But to be in a place where they never really accept mental health issues, and Cai was doing so poorly that they said, you should send her somewhere. I think that speaks volumes. Over the years, after her husband passed, she never really moved through the grief and just kind of got a little bit closer and more clingy with her daughter. And her daughter was running her own business. Cai was such a good businesswoman that she taught her daughter the ropes, and she actually left China and was running a business over in Australia. So after a couple years, in 2012, Cai decides to go visit her daughter in Australia on a tourist visa. And while she's out there, she meets another businessman from China. Now, Cai thinks this is an incredibly rare occurrence. Also, he's cute and giving her attention. Cai and this new guy, Mach, immediately hit it off. So while she's here in Australia visiting her daughter, on the side, she's hanging out with this new guy. It's very exciting. She never thought that she would find love again. He gives her lots of attention. He understands business. They're both from China. Everything is perfect, except of course, one little thing. Listen, guys, you already know what it is. Brian Mach is married. Stop leaving yourself vulnerable to data breaches. You guys should sign up for Aura today and get all of that stuff removed from the internet. And listen, if you don't know what I'm talking about, have you ever gotten like a random text message or phone call that just seemed suspicious? Well, usually what happens is that means your information has been leaked online and somebody bought a giant list of information and they're just going through and seeing which numbers are active. They are testing to see if they can sell your number to somebody else. Isn't that crazy? Your phone number is just being passed around to person for money. And where are they getting this information? They're getting it from public records. They're getting it from websites that you sign up for. We all have to sign up for 100 different websites throughout the entire course of a year. And if you sign up for a company's website and they have not placed money into cybersecurity and data protection, your information is at risk. That email that you put in, that password, that phone number, any of that stuff is all at risk. And the only way to combat it is by taking care of the data. And Aura can help you do that. So if you want to get 14 days free, all you have to do is go to aura.com/sinister. That's aura, AURA.com/sinister. And look, they'll give you 14 days free. On top of that, you'll be able to see exactly what information has been exposed in leaks so that maybe you can go in and change it or stop using that old password. So once again, super important to me, aura.com/sinister. Protect your data. Now, he doesn't tell Cai this at all. She ends up finding out later, but Brian tells her he is actually separated from his wife at the moment. Now, Brian actually did live in a separate house, okay? But he and his wife, Mai, are still legally married, still working with the kids, and kind of still talking about it. In fact, if I recall correctly, I believe he lived quite close to his wife, Mai, in Melbourne, Australia. So this is a problem. Brian is married, but Cai says, you know what? Okay, it's fine. Well, you guys are already separated, so you'll just leave her. And Brian's just kind of like, yeah, maybe. He kind of wants to stay in good graces with Cai. And she's like, okay, you'll end your marriage. And he's like, yeah, okay, just all right. And they keep seeing each other and they keep hooking up and they keep hanging out. And Cai says, you're going to leave your wife? And he's like, yeah, totally. This goes on for 2 years until Cai starts to show Brian another side of herself. This whole time, she had been very sweet, very doting, very patient. But now she's getting angry. She's getting resentful. She's quick-tempered. She's impatient. And she needs more from Brian. And she needs it right now. It's getting pretty intense. And he said, whoa. Guess what, Cai? I got something for you. It's a ring. Brian doesn't quite propose to Cai, but he promises her with this ring that he will marry her. This ring really seems to calm her anxiety for at least another year. But unfortunately, by the 3rd year of Cai and Brian's relationship, he finally tells her something that she doesn't want to hear. Brian has decided not only is he not going to leave his wife, but he's going to get back with her. He's going to move back in, and he doesn't want to see Cai anymore. This infuriated her. Honestly, for the past year, he had already been dealing with these strange behaviors, this quick anger, this impatience, this restlessness. And it's like he just couldn't figure it out. Little does he know that Cai, who he has just broken up with, has been unable to deal with the stress for the past 2 years to the point that she started doing crystal meth. And also, she doesn't like that Brian's breaking up with her, so she told him that she was going to kill his entire family. So Cai starts making these blatant and angry threats to murder Brian and murder his family, but he stayed in contact with her. I mean, maybe he didn't take her seriously. Maybe he didn't think that she would actually do anything violent, or maybe he did think that she had the capability to do something violent, so he was just trying to keep her at bay. So Cai and Brian start this really messed up communication style where sometimes it's, hey, miss you, da. And then when she's not getting what she wants, it switches to extreme threats. And then they would go from the extreme threats back to, hey, Yeah. To me, it really seems like Brian might have been scared of her, and he thought, if I just keep her in my life, then maybe she won't hurt anybody. Like, it's me that she wants, so I'll just kind of be here and figure it out. And sometimes she calls or messages, and Brian, like, just doesn't want to talk. Like, he doesn't have the bandwidth to play fake nice or anything. So she started leaving voicemails. I just want to mention before I tell you a couple of quotes that were from the voicemails. When I dug deeper into this case and found out that Cai was on crystal meth and extremely addicted to it, it not only made me understand why this crime was so brutal, but also it makes the things that she says even scarier. So in October of 2014, Cai started leaving Brian voicemails. She would say to him, quote, "Whatever I'm going to do, it's all because of you, Brian Mach. You forced me to act the way I am today, including my thinking, actions, and behavior. I can't live a normal life like everyone else. I'm living with hate." God, the "I'm living with hate" makes me very uncomfortable. Like, you can tell she blames Brian for everything she's feeling. Then, in November of 2014, the threats began to escalate. She would say, "If you leave me alone, I will kill your wife." She also said, "What you're going to see, Brian, will be the most tragic, and it's all because of you." Man, sometimes people are talking out of their ass when they say crazy stuff like this. To me, Cai actually says some of the most intentional and horrifying things I've ever read. Not only is she saying that she hates life, she sees red and everything, she's pissed, but she blames Brian for all of it, and the way that she wants to get revenge is by murdering his wife. She doesn't just want to kill Mai because she wants to take Mai's place. She wants to kill Mai so that she can hurt Brian. Eventually, during one of her tirades, he actually picks up the phone in the middle of the voicemail, and he tells her, "Cai, you need to go home. You need to leave. You need to stop calling, stop stalking me. Like, please, please stop." And she responded to him, "I'm not going home. I'll come over right now and kill her if she stays like this. I'm going to the supermarket. I'm going to buy a couple of big knives, and then I'm coming." And then Brian, who would get scared, he would kind of try to like coddle her on the phone by telling her to be patient. It was the only tool he had. He didn't want to be with Cai anymore. He was not attracted to her, not into it, but he still continued to tell her to be patient because he didn't know what else to do. He was afraid. I'm not saying that was the right move, but that's why he did it. But it doesn't work anymore. This time, when Brian tells her to be patient after 3.5 years, she says to him, "No way. I can't tolerate it anymore." Months went on, and Cai continues to call and threaten and scream and let it out. She tries to see Brian. She tries to reconnect with him, but it's just all anger and violence. Until one day, she decides to change up her method. She realized that the threats aren't working, and she gets a bright idea. She's like, well, Brian's a businessman, and I'm a businesswoman. Maybe I can trick him with a business deal. So I'm not kidding. When Cai realized the threats weren't working, she tried to offer Brian a business deal where she would pay him to marry her so that she could become an Australian citizen. And she said, "Hey, I just really need this favor because I want to be able to stay in Australia with my daughter." And Brian said, "Fuck no." In order to do this, he would have to officially divorce Mai, wait a period of time, and then commit to marrying Cai. Brian sees right through this. He's like, this is not a business deal. Nope. And he refuses. He won't even see her. He heard her out on it, but he was like, no, get away from me. ZocDoc is a free app where you can find healthcare in minutes. I'm talking high quality in-network doctors in your area that might actually even have appointments in the next 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours. Or if you're just getting ahead of it all and you need to schedule 2 weeks out, guess what? They got it. I've been saying this for a minute. We have needed this type of system for years. I hate calling the doctor. I hate waiting on hold. I hate trying to find their availabilities like verbally, right? I want to look at the times. And guess what? ZocDoc not only has all of their availability availabilities listed on the website. You can just pick a time and book it, but you can also search for providers based on your location and what type of insurance you have. And they will show you so many top-rated doctors right there. It's crazy. I'm actually surprised that it took us this long to get this sort of like scheduling technology, right? I mean, your health is so incredibly important. So if you guys want to try it out, ZocDoc is completely free. All I ask is let them know where you came from. Go to ZocDoc.com/sinister. Okay? It's ZocDoc.com/sinister. We'll put the link in the description as well. But don't forget, guys, it's totally free. No memberships, no extra fees for booking the appointments, no weird stuff. It's free. And we should all be monitoring our health as close as we can. So why not make it easy? Try ZocDoc today. So from the threats to the marriage proposal, that was like from October of 2014 until about February in 2015. Several months. I mean, she even tried to switch up her routine. All she wanted was Brian. So then in March of 2015, she decides she has to see him. She has to. She can't take it anymore. She drove to his house. It was in a place called Albanvale. It's a suburb in Melbourne. Now, Brian doesn't know that she's coming over. She got there quite early, at about 6 o'clock in the morning. She waited outside of his house for his wife, Mai, to leave. Mai wasn't really aware of what was going on. I mean, Brian didn't really have an affair. They were kind of separated, but he was hiding a lot of this from her. So even if Mai had left that morning and saw Cai waiting outside in her car, she probably would have just gotten into her car and left and not thought much of it. She had no idea who this woman was. So while Cai is waiting outside, Mai gets ready and leaves for work. And as soon as she's gone, Cai goes up to the front door. She's, Brian, please just talk to me. Like, I need to see you. Please, please, please. And Brian comes to the door and he's like, hey, I'm watching my grandson today. Can you please not do anything crazy and I will talk to you? And Cai says, yes, please just talk to me. Just let me in. So he lets her in and he shuts the door and Cai just starts demanding that he leaves his wife. I've been waiting 3 years for this. You need to leave her right now. I'm so tired of this, screaming, like upset. Remember, she's on crystal meth. And nobody knows this at the time except for Cai. She's just completely lost it. They get into a heated argument, but Brian does what he does, and he just tries to calm her down. He knows what she wants. She wants him. Brian said later that she was just absolutely hysterical. So he said, hey, let me make us some drinks, some tea, get us some water, something, and let's just sit down and chill. Like, Mai is not here. My daughter is not here. Like, we can talk. Just relax. So he brings some drinks over and they kind of talk for a second. And he's like, okay, that was a lot. I need to go upstairs and I need to check on my grandson. And then Brian says that is the last thing that he remembered before he passed out. Cai had drugged the drinks, unbeknownst to him. He barely even made it upstairs before passing out. And when Brian woke up, he was back in the living room. But this time, his legs and arms were tied with masking tape, and his mouth had been stuffed with a rag. He could not move, he could not escape, and he could only speak if Cai took the rag out of his mouth. He had no idea how long he had been out, but when he woke up, he was disoriented, he felt confused, and Cai was sitting right in front of him. Brian was very, very close with his grandson. Like, they had a very, very strong bond. So when he called out to him over and over and over again, and he didn't respond, Brian just started to cry. He really felt like something was wrong. And while he was crying, Cai said to him, when will that bitch be home? Talking about his wife. This is when Brian realized that he had been bound and gagged by this crazy ex-mistress, and she was waiting for his wife to get home. Now, for months, Cai had been making threats that she was going to murder Mai when she saw her. So now that Brian is in his own living room, tied up, unable to leave, and Cai is sitting in front of him holding these large garden shears. He fears that she really meant everything she said. Brian is just crying. But Cai continues to ask him, when will your wife be home? When will she be home? And he doesn't say anything. He doesn't give her any answers. She told him that she would wait there until she gets home and that she would kill her. After hours and hours and hours in a literal nightmare in his own home, Cai hears a car approach in the driveway at 5 o'clock. And she's been waiting all day for this woman to get home. This woman who has recently reunited with her husband of many years. This woman that is excited to come home and see her grandchild. And she's just getting off for another day of work. Mai pulls up in the driveway. And as she steps out of the car, Cai throws open the door, running out at full speed with these 10-inch garden shears. Mai sees her coming out of her house and running towards her. But before she can even process what happens, Cai is on top of her, stabbing her in her front yard with these garden shears over and over and over again, while Mai is screaming as she's being murdered. The commotion is so intense that a neighbor kind of sees what's going on, but he's afraid to just run out front. So he goes up on his rooftop and started taking photos. Brian Mach is inside, bound and gagged, while he's hearing his wife screaming for help as she's murdered by this woman he was previously involved with. And then everything goes quiet. Cai comes back inside and she tells Brian that she's murdered Mai. She throws the shears on the ground and she said, quote, "I used these. I cut the bitch's throat." Just telling you the direct quotes here. And then, to make things even worse, she said to him afterwards, "I've killed everyone to make you suffer. And if I'm happy, I'll let you go with them." Kai's next plan is to wait for Brian's daughter to get home. So you guys remember the neighbor that was on the roof taking the photos. He goes inside and immediately calls 911. In the pictures, he has Cai standing over Mai, who is laying on the concrete with her hands up in a defensive position, and there's blood everywhere. Him calling the police is probably the only thing that stopped Kai's rampage. They were there so quickly. And when they arrived, Cai and Brian were both in such like a disassociative state that when the police came in, they barely even moved. She was still sitting on the couch with Brian just on the floor and didn't really seem too fazed by the police. If anything, she was upset because she was waiting for Alistair's mother, Brian's daughter, to come home to kill her too. The police release Brian Mach, interviewing him, and they immediately arrest Cai. They surveyed the house, and upstairs they found 4-year-old Alistair with severe head and neck injuries, and he had passed away after over 18 stab wounds. When Brian Mach passed out, after she bound him and gagged him, she went upstairs and she murdered a 4-year-old child with garden shears while she was on fucking crystal meth. Oh my God. Do you guys understand now, like, why this case is, like, burned into my brain? And for many, many years, until, like, I did this round of research, I had no idea that she was on crystal meth. And for some reason, to me, it just makes the case even more horrifying. Like, her flying out of the house to murder Mai, like, all fucking jacked up, and she didn't even know who she is. This is, like, terrifying. It's terrifying. And then also, you know, I know some people might think, well, Brian was having this affair or he had separated for his wife or he did it. Bro, you gotta understand, man, for 10 hours, this man was tied up and gagged while he listened to his entire family being murdered because he didn't want to be with this woman because she was crazy. Cai was taken into custody and Brian then went to the Royal Melbourne Hospital. He had minor injuries, but Brian was under so much psychological stress, they had to sedate him. What he lived through was a literal horror movie, and that's exactly what Cai wanted it to be. I think there was a point where I don't even know if she wanted to be with Brian or if she just wanted to kill everyone that he cared about and leave him alone. They took her in on March 31st, 2015, and she pled guilty, but she refused to speak. In fact, there's some photos of her when she was first arrested where she's just crying hysterically in the car as though she wasn't the perpetrator of this entire crime. But when she got to the jail, she just completely went silent. They got no information from her, but Brian was able to recall almost everything down to the quotes. So when it got to the initial hearings and they were saying everything that Cai did, she just starts sobbing uncontrollably. She's just crying the whole time while she's just feet away from Alistair's mother. She is still alive. Brian and his daughter are still alive, but Mai, his wife, and her son are no longer here. This was quite a while after the murder, but the court records say that Alistair's mother appeared to still be in a state of shock, and she was holding a small teddy bear in the courtroom. Cai did not speak during the trial, but instead had her attorney apologize on her behalf. They said, Miss Liao wishes to apologize to the family for the terrible grief her actions have caused them. Then her lawyer claimed she needed blood pressure medication and she had a lot of really bad thoughts about not wanting to be here anymore. So the trial began on November 4th, 2015, just a few months after the murders happened. I mean, she pled guilty, so it was pretty easy to get things rolling. Now, remember, we're in Melbourne, Australia, so things are a little bit different. But the prosecutor asked for a life sentence with no parole, quote, for at least 30 years. They said, these are extremely serious examples of offensive murder. They were premeditated, deliberate, and calculated. The prosecutors also claimed that Liao's murder of her lover's wife and grandson was driven by a desire for Australian citizenship. No, okay? It was driven by the fact that Cai was off her fucking rocker, man. I know, y'all watch a lot of cases. I'm curious in the comments if you can name another case that involves a female killer that has this level of extremity over revenge. I mean, that's what this was. This is a textbook revenge case, and it is the most extreme form of it I feel like I've personally ever seen. I'm sure you guys that watch a lot of true crime, you guys might be able to name a couple of other ones too, but like, this shit is really up there, man. You did not stab a 4-year-old child 20 times because like you just want something, no matter what it is. Australian citizenship, wanting to be near your kid. Absolutely not. It actually is sorry, I'm just venting about this because it really pisses me off. One, it's fucking crazy. This isn't what the defense is saying. This is what the prosecution is saying. They're saying, you know, it'd be really nice if we gave her at least 30 years. Bro, she was threatening this family for months. She did this for revenge. She murdered a 4-year-old under the jail. Under the jail. Forever. Forever and ever and ever and ever. And also, it's so funny that I literally just said, now guys, remember, we're in Australia, so things are a little bit different. And then I go absolutely off my rocker. But I mean, this is just fucking crazy to me. So, the defense, so this is where the crystal meth comes in. Cai's defense team, they actually bring up the meth. But what they say is, she started using what was known as, quote, ice to deal with the breakup. They were saying, you know, Brian affected her so badly that she turned to drugs. So in Australia, the ice is another term for crystal meth. He also said the breakup was a key driver in the relationship. And he came out and said what he thought Cai's diagnosis was. They came out and said that she had something called, quote, dependent personality disorder. Now, some of you guys may not have ever heard of this before, but if you look it up online, it really is kind of a real thing. It's an extreme fear of abandonment. It's, you know, they need a lot of reassurance for things. They can't be alone. They need people to help them out with things all the time. I do not think that this was Cai. I think that her defense said that she had this disorder to try to infantilize her. They were trying to paint her as a woman who accidentally got hooked on crystal meth and had this childlike personality that couldn't make decisions on her own. And she really, really, really liked Brian. And then when he didn't like her anymore, she just couldn't handle it. First of all, absurd story. She's 45 years old. Second of all, look at the crime. Look at the crime. You guys know, I don't really like to say actual terms of like, you know, disorders or personality disorders or whatever, because you guys know like schizophrenia, borderline, bipolar, they have so many stigmas around them. The last thing we want to do is attach them to a case, right? And then also sometimes, y'all know, how many times has somebody tried to say that they were schizophrenic and they definitely were not, but they just said it to get themselves, you know, off the hook, and now it's tarnished that kind of mental health community. The only reason that I'm bringing up this trial saying she had dependent personality disorder is one, I think it's bullshit. I think that she had something else. And two, it's not really a disorder that's heavily stigmatized, or at least to my knowledge. So just giving you guys that information, but normally I don't bring up any disorders the defense claims. Now look, I will say something was definitely wrong with Cai, because after she had been in jail for a while, she was off the meth, But in the courtroom, she had some very strange behaviors. Here's what she would do in the courtroom while the proceedings were going on. She would take this kind of like rag or napkin, and she would put it over her face, just covering her face. She would put that over her face, and she would just rock back and forth, crying and wailing and just, ah! And there was one day that she was just wailing so loud that like they had to call a recess and come back the next day. Like all while she just had this rag over her face screaming over what she did. The one time that she was a bit quiet and finally paid a bit of attention is when Brian went up to do his impact statement. One of the most horrifying things is that Cai wanted him to hurt. She wanted him to suffer. She told him that much. For the case, Brian kind of has to make this victim impact statement. It's important so that the judge understands not only the severity of the crime, but how this has affected the man that survived. And on the other hand, it's horrifying because Cai is probably excited to hear this. She wants to know exactly how he's feeling after everything that she did. But he's able to put that out of his mind, and he speaks to the judge about his wife and about Alistair. I heard the last sounds of my wife, and then all of a sudden, it was silent. I felt like they were dead because of my behavior, and my family will no longer speak to me. I carry Alistair's toys around with me. I bought him some new clothes and keep them in my bed. Everything is gone. I just met somebody that I should have never met. After Brian's statement, Justice Lex Lasry said that Cai's crimes did warrant a life sentence. But for some reason, they made her eligible for parole after 32 years. Now, she was about 45 at the time of the murders, so she might get out at 78, or who knows, they might even let her out sooner for good behavior. I don't know why they did this, but regardless, if Cai survives the 32 years in prison and she's paroled afterwards, they would end up immediately deporting her to China upon her release. And back home, she doesn't really have any resources. I mean, everything's going to be gone after 30 years. The judge said that her actions were horrendous, horrific, and almost unbelievable. They said while her mental state reduced her culpability, he did not think that she had developed proper insight into the gravity of what she had done. Okay, I don't normally do this, but we need to debrief, okay? Like I said, this is one of those cases that has been on my brain for well over a decade. I have told the story before in the past. I hope we did it a little more justice and gave more information this time. The crystal meth part was a huge factor in this case. It was a huge factor, and I can't believe that I wasn't aware of that previously when I talked about it. So it's kind of coming to me in a new light. But one question I have for you guys is, do you believe that Cai really had this dependent personality disorder? Or do you think that this was something that the defense just kind of brought up to try to infantilize her? I mean, you guys have probably also seen a lot of cases where the defense kind of just makes up this like excuse disorder. We've seen them before a few times on the channel. But this one was interesting because I hadn't really heard much about it before. And I just don't see Cai as this childlike, innocent person, but, I leave the ball in your court. I'm curious you guys' thoughts. I also ask that, when you're thinking about this case or talking about it, please, don't point a finger at Brian. He met her when they were separated. He just didn't really know how to get out of the relationship, and he lived through one of the most horrifying things I've ever heard in my entire life. And now his family won't talk to him. He is actually alone, exactly as Cai intended, punishing him for really what was just a 2-year little relationship. The last thing that I want to ask is, You saw, I was pretty bummed to hear that she can get paroled after 32 years. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. I'm not sure. Do you think that Cai Liao is the type of person that can be rehabilitated and understand her actions and be let back into society? Or do you think that she's somebody that we should keep in prison forever?